We're now on Daf Lamed Hey Amid Beis. Kan Kodem Chazora, Kan Liacher Chazora, Umishna Lo Zozam Imkoma. Okay. Now, in our Mishnah, as we said at the outset when we started this daf, there's a record of a dialogue between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yishmael, and at some point, Rabbi Yishmael raised the objection of the Isser Anoah. Why isn't there no Isser Anoah in the cheese of Akum? And at that point, Rabbi Yeshua retracted his original statement. So there are two periods of time. There's the time period before Rabbi Yeshua retracted his statement, meaning before Rabbi Gamliel convinced him that he's got a major hole here in his thesis because of the Isser Anoah. And then there's the post-retraction period. And the two statements of Shmuel correspond to these two periods of time, meaning that Shmuel, when he made his statement, and he said that the reason for the Iser of Gvinas Akum is because of the Or Hakeva. That was after Rabbi Shmuel convinced Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua then retracted his statement. But that which Shmuel said, that even the keva itself is prohibited, that was based on the time period before Rabbi Yeshua rescinded his position, and he considered rennet as basar. It's not pirsha. Now, if it's basar, then it's asur b'toras nevela. So that was Rabbi Yeshua's pre-retraction position, his original position, in which the keva itself, meaning rennet, is prohibited under nevela. So then Rabbi Shmuel attacks Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua retracts his statement, and he says that the rennet is only pirsha. It can't be basar because then, as Rabbi Yishmael argued, it would be asur ba'anoah. So there's no contradiction between the two statements of Rabbi Shmuel, one which implies the keva is mutter, which reflects the final position of Rabbi Yeshua after retraction, as opposed to the other statement of Shmuel that seems to indicate that even the keva itself is not pirsha, but rather basar, and therefore the keva itself is asur. And that reflects the original position of Rabbi Yeshua. Weiter. Rav Malkia Mishmein Rav Hamar, another explanation why the Chachamim prohibited the cheese of idol worship is Machlikin Paneo B'Shuman Chazir. What they do is that they want to smear oil on the face of the cheese, and they use shuman of chazir to do so, which is called in English lard. The cheese absorbs the lard coating, and therefore it's like eating basar chazir. Now we have another explanation why the Rabbanan prohibited gvinas akum. Rav Chizam Neshama Midim Osa, bechometz. They actually curdle the cheese with vinegar. And this is a little bit beyond my knowledge of cheese making, but apparently wine produces vinegar, and therefore the wine itself, of course, is yain nesech. And the vinegar somehow is used to curdle milk to make cheese. Again, we can soon see the Gemara is going to ask if that be the case, it should be also by no. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Omer, Mipnei Shemamidim Osa B'Sraf HaOrla. Orla, the first 3 years that the tree, since it's planting, the tree produces fruit, is also by no. And even if that tree was owned by a guy, nevertheless, the peros of that tree are also by no b'toras Orla. So Rav Nachman says that they take the sap from an orla tree and they use it to curdle the milk. And therefore the milk should be also by no, as the Gemara is going to object now. Kiman, ki haitana, like the Tana of the Mishnah is in Perek Alpha Orla. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Hamamid b'Srafa Orla also Neshu Pri. So the sraf, which we said is the sap of the Orla, has the same status as Pri, and the Torah prohibited at the beginning of Parshas Kedoshim the peros of Orla the first 3 years. And therefore, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says that the problem with cheese from Goyim is they use the sap of an orla tree, of orla fruits, to curdle the milk and make the cheese. The Gemara says no. There's a machlokes between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah in Orla, and afilu tem Rabbi Yeshua who is makil with regard to something that we'll see in a minute called kitfa de gavza. Anyway, I'd kan lo pligi Rabbi Yeshua alei to Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yeshua is makil in the case of this of the orla, the fruits of the orla of akum. Ella, where does Rabbi Yeshua come up with his kula bekitfa de gavza, which is translated here as resin of wood? And Rabbi Yeshua holds that's called wood. That's not a fruit. That's not a pri. It's not included in the Isser Orla. Aval bekitfa de peri modi. But let's say you take the sap out of a fruit, even Rabbi Yeshua would confess that the sap is considered part of the pri, and it's also midin orla. I know this not on Rabbi Yeshua. Shamati beferush shamami b'sraf ha'olin u'b'sraf ha'ikrin muter, but b'sraf ha'pagin also mipnei shu pri. So we'll take the last case. The case is pagin. Pagin are fruit, are figs that haven't ripened yet, like a primi is called a pag, even today in modern Hebrew. So a primi fig is called pagin in the plural. And the sap of the unripe young figs, the immature figs, is called a pri, and it's included under the Isser Orla. And therefore, if the Goyim put the sap of pagim, of Orla, in the process of making the cheese, they do the maimid with that sap of the immature pagim, then the cheese has the halacha, the status of Orla. And the Gemara again is going to object, but then if that be the case, it should be also by no. Now, there's something called olim and sraf. So olim are the leaves of an orla tree, and they have a certain, like a liquid on these leaves. If you pluck out the leaves, they have a sap on it. And the roots of an orla tree likewise have a sap. That's not a pri. It's coming either from the leaves or from the roots. But if you're taking the figs themselves, that has a din of a pri. Frek the Gemara Bein Rav Chizda, who's worried about chometz, which is wine. Bein Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who's worried about arla. Te aser b'hano kasha. The Gemara has no answer for this. Dorash Rav Nachman Braid Rav Chizda. We're going back to that pasuk that Rabbi Yeshua used to distract Rabbi Gamliel. The fragrance of your oils are good, and we refer that to a Talmid Chacham who teaches Torah, and therefore he gives out a fragrance of oil, a good oil. Palitin is balsam. Palitin is balsam oil that has a fragrant odor, and the balsam oil is kept in a flask. Megula, if he opens the flask, then Reicha Nodev, the fragrance spreads throughout. But Mechusa, if he closes and covers this flask, then Reicha Ein Reicha Nodev, it doesn't spread. So the Torah scholar, if his flask of Torah is open and he shares his Torah with others, then it will be a great smell, a beautiful fragrant smell for the people who are receiving his Torah. But if he closes the flask, meaning he doesn't go out and teach, he's one of those hidden Lamed Vavnikim, then it's maybe there are things that he understands, but there's no great smell that that impact, that legacy that he's having in transmitting Torah. Shenemar alamos ahevucha, which literally means the maidens love you. Karibei alumos, but we read it as if it had vocalized alumos, which are the Lashon Helem, hidden things. And therefore, those hidden things become revealed to him. The Farshim say that when you teach Torah, then you learn Torah from your students. And furthermore, the Malach Mavis loves him too much to take his life. So the Torah scholar will live extra years. Shenemar alamos aivucha, kari be al mavis. You take the word alamos and split it in half, as if it had said over death, meaning it's referring to the Malach Mavis, and the Malach Mavis loves the Talmidei Chachamim and who teach Torah, and therefore he doesn't take their lives so quickly. Furthermore, he inherits the world, this world, Echad Olam Hazeh, and the world to come, Echad Olam Haba, and Emer Alamos in the plural, Karibei Alamos. And that leads us to the Mishnah. V'elu dvarim shel akum asurim v'eni surim isra no. The following items on the list that we're going to have come from the goyim, but you're allowed to benefit from them. You can't eat them. Cholav shechalavo ovikolcham ben yisoro ehu. Right, this is what we call stam cholav, meaning there was no supervision, and the goy milked the cow. And we have a chashash that maybe he mixed in pig's milk or camel's milk. I don't know what kind of non-kosher milk, because there's no one to supervise it. And non-kosher milk is aser b'shtia, but not b'hana. So it says v'en Yisrael ro'eu. It doesn't mean that the Yisrael has to be there every moment that the idol worshiper is milking the cow, but he's got to be able to see him from time to time. He comes in, he comes out, he supervises. Vapas. Bread from idol worshippers is prohibited. And we're going to see two different possible reasons, whether it's the kashrus issue that maybe they use lard to make the bread, or chasnus, it's a way of separating us from the goyim. and avoiding intermarriage. Now, the final conclusion of the Gemara is that the bread of idolaters is also because of chasnus, because of intermarriage, but not because of kashrus. We're not concerned that the bread absorbed non-kosher flavor from the idolaters' utensils, because we would assume that the utensils had not absorbed fresh flavors of forbidden foods that day. So now we get into another concept in Taruvas called no sein ta'am lifgam. The day-old flavors to not cause the food to be prohibited. And that's called no sein ta'am lifgam, ta'am pogum. Next, hashemen shalahem. Did you ever hear anybody who didn't want to buy oil from the goyim? But the Mishnah says that that we don't use the oil of the goyim. However, look weiter. It says Rebbe ubeis dino itiru shemen. There's a girsa problem. It's not really Rebbe. It should be Rabbi Yehuda Nisiyah, which is the grandson of Rebbe. And they went ahead and they were mater shemen. So we're going to have a whole sugi about shemen. I remembered this from my childhood, but I didn't think it was so early in Masechta Avoda Zara. I thought it was at the end of Masechta Avoda Zara. Vashlokos. Shlokos is what we call bishul akum. That means food that's inedible raw, and it was cooked and made edible by the goyim. Ukvasim shedarkam loseis litochan yain v'chometz. So we're talking about now, he calls it preserves, but I'm not sure. I think it's more either like pickles or certain vegetables that, here he says fish, vegetables, or meat are preserved in vinegar, which again has the status of yayin. And once again, the question is going to be why it's aser b'achila but not b'ana. Vitzir, vitaris trufa. Okay, trufa means chopped up. So talking about chopped up taros. Taros is a kind of a fish. And even though taros is a kosher fish, but the chashash was that non-kosher fish was mixed in by the goyim and minced together with the kosher taros fish, and you wouldn't be able to know that. Vitzir she'ein badaga kilbis shotesisvo. Interesting. There's a certain fish called a kilbis, and the presence of the kilvis is going to prove that this fish or this brine is kosher. And in its absence, we have to worry about an admixture of non-kosher fish. Now, why is it that the kilbis, when it's there, guarantees that the fish are kosher? So here we have to take a quick crash course in fish. Kilbis is an aquatic creature, itself non-kosher, which develops in brine that's derived from kosher fish, but not in brine containing any mixture of non-kosher fish. Therefore, if fish brine does not contain any kilbis, you can't eat the brine because we're concerned that maybe it has an admixture of the brine of non-kosher fish. But if, on the other hand, there's kilbis, so even though the kilbis itself is non-kosher, but nonetheless, it develops in brine that's derived from kosher fish. So I guess he's saying that you simply remove the kilbis, and you know that the brine is kosher. Vaita vachilik. chilek we had already in the past, which we called a sultanus, I think. 28. Sultanus. Oh, that's where the fins and scales develop later on, not at birth, and it's a kosher fish. But it looks like non-kosher fish. I mean, they have the same similarity as non-kosher fish, and therefore, if you if you want to buy chilek, which is a kosher fish, you have to be concerned that maybe they mixed in non-kosher fish. This is the problem, I think, also of tuna fish. Because there are many species of tuna fish, most of them are not kosher. So when you fish them together in one net, you have 1,000 fish, but if one of them is non-kosher, then it's a non-kosher species of tuna fish. It's going to be the whole taruvus is awesome. Because it's a complete fish. It's a bir, it's lat bottle, even an elf. All right. Weiter. V'koret shel chiltis. A grain of chiltis. He says that chiltis is a plant with a very sharp flavor. So it's a davar charif. And therefore, if you cut chiltis with a knife, and that knife was used by the akum for non-kosher food, then the tam that was balua in the sakin now goes into the chiltis. Umelech salkudnis. Okay, that's a kind of a salt. We have to see the Gemara for that. So all these are kashrus problems, and therefore they're mutar bano. Why is it that we can't buy milk from the goyim without supervision? If you're going to tell me that they're selling you milk from a non-kosher animal, that's impossible because Torah chivur v'tomei yorel. The milk of a kosher animal is white. The milk of a non-kosher animal is yellow. The imishum iruve, and if you're going to say that maybe, although the milk from a non-kosher animal, like a pig, is yellow, but if they only added a smaller amount, then the whiteness of the milk overpowers the yellowness of the small amount of swine milk. Neku. Why don't we just do a scientific test? Let's try to curdle the milk, and the milk will only successfully curdle and make cheese if it's pure, kosher animal milk, a cow's milk. The Omar Mar, Chol of Tahar Omeid, the milk of a kosher animal will curdle, but Chol of Tomei Eino Omeid. And apparently that applies even if the volume of non-kosher milk is very limited. This whole discussion here about butter. Right, the milk of a non-kosher animal, even if it curdles, but only a small amount of solids separated, most of the milk remains with the whey. Anyway, there's a scientific way of determining. So Gemara answers, you're right. If the Jew purchases this chalav, this milk, in order to make cheese, fine. But the kaboy he wants to use it as a dairy dip. So he's not going to do any curdling of it and make it into cheese, and he won't be able to know whether or not the milk is pure tahar milk or not. Yes, so the Gemara is not happy with this either. V'nishkol minei kali v'nekum. Okay, he wants this milk for dairy dip. Lechamcha. Fine, but take away from this milk that's being sold to you by the idolater a little bit of the milk and do a test on that little bit of the milk and see if you could curdle cheese. So Gemara answers that this test is not effective. Why? In kosher milk, there is a whey component that does not curdle. So there might be non-kosher milk mixed in with the whey. Otherwise, you could say, afilu tema de kaboy lelikvina, even if you'll say the Mishnah prohibits the milk, even where the Jew wants to make it for cheese, and we already established that non-kosher milk doesn't curdle. So why don't we just do this test? There's always some way, W-H-E-Y, that remains amongst the holes of the cheese itself. Therefore, there might be some non-kosher milk that mixed with the kosher whey, W-H-E-Y, in these holes, and therefore the cheese is forbidden. Vapas. Why can't we eat the bread of a goy? Omer of Kanam Rabbi Yochanan Paslo Huchu Bezdin. Enochinami. They did not permit pas baked by an idolater in the Jewish courts, but Michal de Ikaman de Sharet. You're implying that there is someone who does permit bread in the Chiyasar of Dimi Omer Pamachas Yotzer Rabbi Lesodeh Hevi Akum Lefon of Pas Purni, pas that was baked in an oven called a Purni oven, Mafes Sa'ah, baked at the size of a Sa'ah. Omer Rebbe Kameno Pasu Maro Chachamim Liosra. So it sounds like Rebbe would be matir pas. He saw the beauty of this pas that was being sold by the idolaters, and he wanted to know why would the Chacham prohibit it. So Gemara says, I don't get it. Maro Chachamim, did Rebbe not know why the Chachamim prohibited pas? Mishum chasnus, because we want to avoid intermarriage. Ella, but rather what Rebbe meant to say was Maro Chacham li osra bisadeh. Why, if you go out in the fields where you're not going to have any social interaction with the goyim, why should it be also? And kasvurim ha'am hita Rebbe apas. Rebbe thought, the people who heard Rebbe's statement, why should pas be also out in the fields? They thought that Rebbe permitted the bread of an idolater. But really, he only meant to say it should be permitted out in the fields, far away from any social intercourse. Velohi. The Gemara says, Rebbe lohiter sapas. They made a big mistake. Rebbe was not matir the pas. And apparently he wasn't even matir in the soda. So he says when the sages issued their ban on idolatrous bread, they applied it to all places so as to avoid confusion. Whether it be the bread in the city, the bread outside the city. Rav Yosef Itema, Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Omar, Lo Kacha Yamaisa, that wasn't the story. Ella Omru, Pamachas Holach Rebbe L'Mokom Echad, he went to a place for Raw Pas Dochuk Talmidim. He saw the Talmidim didn't have enough bread to eat. Omar Rebbe asked, Ein kan palter, is there no baker here? Now, what's he referring to, a Jewish baker or a non-Jewish baker? So I think he's saying a non-Jewish baker. Kasvurim ha'am lomar, palter oved kol chavim, is therefore mutter. So they understood that he was referring to a non-Jewish baker, and Rebbe therefore was telling us that we could buy the bread that's baked professionally by the bakers and sold on the market, because that's not going to lead to chasnas. So if you buy a loaf of Arnold's white bread, you're not going to marry Arnold's son or daughter. However, Hulo Omer Elapalter Yisrael. He was just asking, why is it there's no bread here for the students? Are there no Jewish bakers here? But now the Gemara is assuming that even paspalter would be also. Even if you'll say that the story happened and Rebbe was asking we should permit the bread of a professional baker, an idolater, there's no Jewish baker available. Then we can't buy paspalter from the goyim. And it sounds like, first I thought maybe we want to give business to the Jewish bakers. But then I thought that maybe it's saying that only b'shas adchak can we rely on this heter paspalter and buy from the non-Jewish professional bakers. But if there are Jewish bakers available, it's not a shas adchak, and therefore we're not going to go into this heter of buying paspalter. Even if the Maisa happened and Rebbe wanted to permit the bread of a professional baker who's an idolater, that. Oh, so here's a tremendous machlokas we showed him here, but I'm going to go to one shita. You have to have a second condition. It's not only that he's a profession, that this idolater is a professional baker, but also you're only allowed to eat that pas outside the city limits where there's no intimacy. Avol be'ir in the city, lo mishum chasanos. Now, here's an interesting story that the Gemara tells about a fellow named Ivo, Havi, and he was apparently one of the Chachmei Yisrael. Havi ka menakes the ochel pas abe metzre. So he was on the borderline between the city and out of the city, and he was eating the bread of an idolater. And obviously, they got upset about that. The Rabbanan made a gzeira that we don't eat the pas of an akum. We're not going to listen to all the rulings when you come to the Beis Medrash, and that's mida keneged mida, because you didn't want to listen to what the Chachamim said that you're not allowed to eat pas palter. Shemen, and with this we'll conclude. Rav Omar, Donil Gozrala, Ushmuel Omar, we don't need a separate gzeira to prohibit oil from goyim, but zilifasam shel kelim tveim osrasam. In other words, the idolaters pour their oil into tomei containers, which have absorbed in their walls all sorts of isurim, and therefore the absorbed flavor penetrates into the oil. And the Gemara is going to object and say, "Atu kuli alma ochle taharos ninhu el zlifasan shel kelim asurim osrasam." So it seems that the concept of kelim tmeim here, which we'll pick up Mitzvah tomorrow, is not because, as I said before, there's a blia of isur in the walls of these containers, but rather the word tmeim here means tumah. So the kelim were makabel tumah from the idol worshippers, and now if you're gonna use the oil that comes in these kelim, you're gonna be mitame yourself. So the Gemara asked, wait a minute, all right, you be mitame yourself. So what? What's the prohibition of being mitame yourself? There's a very special group of Jews who are ochli taros. They only eat foods that are tar, but it doesn't mean that everybody is makbid, and therefore you're going to prohibit the oil. And therefore the Gemara retracts it and says, no, Shmuel meant the emission of flavors, which is called zlifasan shel kelim asur. The issue is not one of tumah, but one of kashrus. The oil absorbs the forbidden flavors emitted by the idolater's utensils. So according to Shmuel, the oil was not a permitted item that had to be banned by Gzeres Chachamim because of intermarriage, but rather it's based on kashrus. So if we had more time to learn this sugya in depth, we'd have to see what's an afkamina between that which is also mishum chasnus and that which is also mishum kashrus. And the nafkamina that first flies through my brain is the case of paspalta. That if there's no kashrus issue, but the issue is marriage, then if it's coming from a professional baker, and especially with Rabbi Yochanan's second condition, that you eat the pas outside the city limits, then I could understand you could be makil. But if we're worried that the pas itself was made with non-kosher oils, then it makes no difference whether it's professionally baked and whether you want to eat it in the city or out of the city. So I think as a general rule, we could say that when the Iser is a chasnus issue, it's not as all extensive, and it doesn't have the same scope of application as a kashrus issue. Because the kashrus issue you can't play around, but the intermarriage issue, you can always come up with situations where there's no chashash chasnus. So here we're up to Daf Lamed Vav. And tomorrow, if noontime works for you, okay, great.
So with the bread, we're not concerned that they made it with milk, and we didn't know that, and then we'd eat it with basar.
Well, basar b'cholav is only also when you cook the milk and the meat together. The Rabbanan prohibited even when there's no mixture of cooking milk with meat, but to add on top of that exera that maybe they would, add milk to the, you follow what I'm saying? In other words, if they added non-kosher oil, that's a chefza d'isura. But if they added milk, maybe your question is as follows. Maybe they'll add pig's milk into the bread. So I don't know. We said that pig's milk in the case of curdling will only create yellow cheese. So I don't know what pig's milk, what impact it would have on bread. Maybe you could Google that and find out. Or ask the artificials. Not the officials, but the artificials. Okay, then. This was very exhausting for me, this daf. I tried and I tried. There's so much scientific, what's it called? Mitzius. There's a word for it in English. But I'm not, it's just not a professional, I don't have the knowledge. But we did whatever we could in the context of Daf Yomi. And we're getting oriented in certain concepts, basic concepts. Kvinas akum and pas akum and shemen akum. I mean, these are bishul akum. These are household words that we have to be exposed to.